So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to everyone who traveled to Chicago, and good to see you, my fellow Chicago residents. And first, I want to thank Penny to make sure that today's event is happening on a day where there's no World Cup game. Because if not, I might have been able to cancel and not speaking here. It's great to see every one of you at this year's CGCC Chicago Annual Gathering after 2 long years where we could not meet in person. So on behalf of Mayor Laura Lightfoot and her administration, I would like to express my gratitude that you have once again chosen Chicago as your venue for this great important gathering throughout the day and the gala tonight. And I think we're in a treat for the next couple hours because the afternoon forums and panels will cover many important topics that hopefully will provoke thoughts and insights facing many global economic and health issues. Your endorsement and active participation today are critical for bilateral business and investment discussions and opportunities. It's more important than ever in today's complex world that we meet and talk face to face in one room, in one time zone. And please allow me first to share some background on the importance of the Chicagoland-China relationship. For decades, Chicago and China have had strong bilateral relations. Soon after the US-China formalized relations began, many Chicagoland companies began to operate in China. In 1985, Chicago became sister cities, not with one, but with 2 Chinese cities, Shanghai and Shenyang. And people don't know that the Chicago public schools have the largest Chinese language program in the US, with over 12,000 students learning and mastering Mandarin. And in 2014, Chicago hosted US-China CGCC, the bilateral trade negotiations with US and China. It was the first time that the CGCC met and was held outside of DC or Beijing. And I think they all realized that Chicago is a much better place to meet and gather. And on the business side, Chicago-China relationships and ties continue to be strong and deep. More than 160 Chicago-area companies have operations in China. And in pre-COVID, China was the 2nd largest trade partner for Illinois with over 40 billion, just behind Canada. And as we all know, our beloved O'Hare International Airport is the largest US air gateway for China trade with over 40 flights per week. And I do have to call out the critically important Chicago-China Gateway Cities Agreement that was signed in 2013 and then further extended in 2018. We're also proud to be called the home for over 160 mainline companies, including Wenjiang, Goldwyn, Bank of China, H&A, CRC, and many others. We do appreciate your business involvement, support, and investments. And today's gathering is being held with the backdrop of a strong, prosperous Chicagoland economy. So please allow me to brag a little bit how well we're doing here in Chicagoland. Chicago has been the #1 in corporate expansions for the last 9 years in North America. And we are so lucky because we're so diversified. No one industry has more than 14% of our economy. And our diverse economy is one of the top really growth areas across North America. We're the top 3 metro area in North America based on GRPs. And as a data person, I do love me some good metrics. So one core measure is to see of how to measure the attractiveness of our business ecosystem is what we call pro-Chicago decisions. We're looking at corporate relocations and significant expansions in Chicago. In 2022, we had over 166 pro-Chicago decisions with 120 expansions and 46 new companies relocating to Chicago. If you would read the local press, you would not realize that this is the fact and nothing else. And last year, we had over 173 pro-Chicago decisions, an all-time record for our city. A second core metric is we look at investments. How much private equity and VC money is being invested in Chicago-based startups. And last year was our record with over $10 billion invested in our ecosystem. And this year, we're on the track record to match last year's all-time record. And one of the drivers is we are among the top 10 global innovation centers in the world. We are one of the home to the advanced computing and optical network facilities, and we have every year $16 billion in annual university and corporate research investments, over 16 billion. And one of the reasons is one of our big strategic tech bets is our focus on quantum computing, be one of the truly global centers of excellence, driven primarily by our two key national labs, Argonne and Fermilab, the first ever quantum computing accelerator, and the fact that we are getting 40% of any federal dollar invested in quantum computing research. So Chicago, as we all know, besides this hard facts, offers as well amazing a range of quality of life and affordable cost of living for all new talent that wants to move here. That's why companies and people and families thrive. And in closing, I would like to stress the following. We welcome more Chinese companies coming and investing in Chicago as the gateway to the Midwest. We want you here. We welcome you here. We want to partner with you. Last but not least, I need and would love to thank Pin Ni, Chairman of CGCC Chicago and President of Wenzhong America, for his tremendous leadership, for all that he does to advance our common cause here in Chicago. He is a true beacon of light in today's sometimes noisy, complex world. He's a trusted friend and advisor to myself and to Mayor Lori Lightfoot. I'm honored to call you a friend and a partner in our all joint effort for a better world for everyone. Thank you, Pin. So please enjoy this afternoon session. I hope I'm looking forward to some agreements and to some disagreements. Please enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Now I would like to introduce Abby Lee, the Director of Corporate Communications and Research, who will present the CGCC 2022 Annual Business Survey Report on Chinese enterprises in the U.S.
Thank you. Great. Thank you all. Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. My name is Abby Lee. I'm the Director of Corporate Communication and Research from CGCC USA. And today, on behalf of CGCC, I'm very honored and glad to present you the update findings of our 2022 Annual Business Survey on Chinese enterprises in the United States. There are a few topics that I'd like to cover and walk you through today, so you will have a brief understanding of the project itself and some of the key trends identified in our survey report this year. I hope the findings would be helpful and inspiring to our discussions and panels today. So, as one of the most comprehensive research projects focusing on existing Chinese enterprises in the U.S., our survey helps to timely update the business development of Chinese companies in the U.S. and reflect the issues they've encountered in the past year. And at the same time, the report also helps the U.S. side, helps the U.S. market and the companies and other facilities and organizations to better understand the operational status of Chinese business, their positive impacts on and contributions to the U.S. economy and the local communities. And we have been conducting this annual research since 2014, so this is actually our 9th consecutive survey report. This year, we gathered firsthand data from 111 Chinese companies. Our respondents' U.S. operations are established in 42 states across the U.S., and their subsidiary offices and facilities can be located across the country. The top 5 states that host our respondent companies are California, New York, Texas, New Jersey, and here in Illinois. Our company's U.S. operations span all 11 sectors according to the global industry classification standards, as we can see. Well, another 2 helpful indicators to better understand the demographics are the ownership structure of their parent companies, as well as the corporate structure through which they have established the U.S. operations. As we can see from the charts, nearly half of the respondents are private companies, and about 19% of them are government-owned. And most of the companies, actually 63% of the respondents entered the U.S. market via greenfield investment, which means they establish a new business entity here instead of acquiring an existing one. So as we have been seeing for the past few months, when looking at the data results, it actually reflects a mixed picture of how Chinese companies have been doing in the U.S. for the past year. So on the positive side, we actually observed a slightly recovered performances. We believe it was supported by companies' resilience and their commitment to business growth as their primary objective. And while on the other hand, companies are also complaining or claiming that the pressures and challenges are mounting due to a quickly changing, complex, and increasingly contested environment in 2021. So the slight recovery was first reflected in their revenue and profitability. As we can see here, 54% of the respondent companies reported an increased revenue last year, and that number was only 20% in the year prior due to our survey results from 2021. It has clearly bounced back to the pre-pandemic level and even close to the results that we had in 2017 and 18. Also aligned with the revenue, companies' EBIT margin, which indicates their profitability status, was also slightly restored to the 2020 level. Okay. From the new investment perspective, it's worth noticing that 24% of respondents made new investments in the US in 2021, and that number actually doubled our result from 2021. Also, let's get back to it a little bit. Well, the majority of the new investments were made in energy, IT, and financial sectors, indicating that the market has been expanding in those industries. Also, the results aligned with the trend that Chinese companies tend to invest in digital transformation in the past 3 years during the pandemic years. And our data and interview with business executives also indicated that Chinese companies remained committed to the US market over the long run. In fact, we also observed a clear bouncing back in terms of assessment of the US business and investment environment by our respondent companies this year. Shown in those little hearts, we can see like 29% of respondents claimed either a moderate or substantial improvement in the local business climate. And that number was only 5% in our last year's survey. Well, that's the positive side of the story. Well, the other part of the mixed picture comes from the complicated state of US-China relations and the instability of the US as well as the global economy. The uncertainties posed great challenges to our business in almost every aspect of their business operations. And part of the challenges comes from responding to the inflation and difficulty in retaining and maintaining, recruiting and maintaining talents here in the US, and high compliance cost and a general low acceptance or trust to the Chinese brands overall. So it also triggered overwhelming challenges or concerns by the vast majority of the responding companies. Well, one trend I think it's worth noticing is that the company's Chinese headquarters or their parent companies' commitment to the US market in the short run seems to be wavering or shaking in this year's survey results. We can see 74% of respondents reported that they had reinvested the majority of the U.S. profits in the U.S. business again. And that number was 90% 90% for 2020 and 80% for 2019. So, which means like less companies are reinvesting their U.S. profits back into their U.S. operations. And similarly, when looking at the U.S. operations revenue contributions to their parent companies on the left, we found a higher percentage. 71% of the respondents counted less than 10% of the company's global revenue. And that percentage was actually the highest since 2018, which means more companies are contributing less to their company's global revenue. Yeah, that's what we found this year. So, and also companies' expectations for the relationship, the bilateral relationship in the near future are not getting better. As we can see, nearly half, 94% of the surveyed companies forecasted a worse U.S.-China relationship, bilateral relationship than the year prior. Last year, it was only 25%. And only 10% of them expect improvements, which was only 1/4 of the number in 2020 results. So similar situations for the trade and economic relations at the bottom. So looking at the mixed picture, it's not difficult to identify the cautious optimism from our respondents. And looking forward, well, a slightly larger number of companies compared to the year prior expect higher revenues over the next 2 years. Well, in terms of future investments, 27% of the respondents are investing more in the coming year. So while the number was only 12% from our last year's results. So over the long run, Chinese companies are still strategically committed to the US market as a critical part of their global business strategy. Okay, and as we mentioned earlier, with expanding challenges and the risks over the past years, Chinese companies' compliance with US regulations and laws has begun to catch the attention of business managers and policymakers in both countries. So in our 2022 business survey, we took a closer look at the legal and compliance part of the Chinese companies' operations here in the US. So when asking about the challenges companies face in complying with US laws and regulations, and surprisingly, complex and ambiguous US laws and regulations tops the list. So as noted, the expanding regulations has been a key driving force of the US corporate compliance movement since the early 1990s. And sometimes the vague standards, instead of clear-cutting rules, permitted the regulations. So therefore, even sizable US companies with highly sophisticated compliance staff cannot guarantee full compliance. So much less for Chinese companies that entered the US decades ago and are still testing the water. So moreover, about half of the respondents considered potential conflicts between US and Chinese laws and regulations to be also a major challenge. So in the past few years, the deteriorating relations between US and China and the rapid shifting geopolitical order have also led to more conflicts and regulations between us as both are adopting expanding sanctions and corresponding blocking regulations. And that was the two major challenges confronted by companies. And others included, you can find in our report, our lack of awareness about the cost of non-compliance, lack of communication with US regulators, and difficult to control the risks relating to third-party vendors. So due to the time, I won't go too deep for all the details, but in our full report, we discussed these aspects regarding legal and compliance. So please feel free to visit our website and get access to the digital copy of our full survey report in both English and Chinese. And the other featured topic of the report is brand and trust, which also speaks to our event theme today. So as Chinese companies have been entering and competing in the US for decades, they are constantly adapting to the local market and evolving upward along the industry value chain. So right now, many Chinese companies our Chinese brands are striving to go to the front row to try to communicate directly with their consumers and clients, and trying to better understand and even influencing their expectations and perceptions. So that's why we have been witnessing the trend that companies are heavily investing in brand and trust, which is arguably the most valuable intangible asset of our company. So this year, the survey was designed to understand some of the critical aspects of Chinese companies' journey of managing their brand image and reputations in the US. So when being asked about the current brand presence in the US of their companies, 29% of our respondent companies feel that they currently have a either moderately or extremely weak brand presence. 71% feel neutral, and only 7 of them feel very confident about their presence in the US. So obviously there's much to work and much work remains to do, and there's huge potential for us to improve. The data clearly echoes the challenging business environment that Chinese companies face in the US. Considering the foreign nature of them, it's especially important that business leaders and managers, entrepreneurs, are highly motivated in boosting brand and trust when trying to enter and to expand in the US market. So for those whose objectives are establishing and maintaining a US brand presence, the top reasons for that are to form an integral part of their company's global strategy, to expand the customer base, to develop a relationship with key suppliers, partners, and investors, and to build reputations and trust in the US. We also ask about the main challenges of companies doing branding and marketing in the US. And also from our interactions with our member companies, we feel that they are a little bit hesitant or confused about their approaches in terms of branding and marketing, especially like from what angles to break into those in those practices, because challenges in the US are obviously and increasing. So the main challenges are like low trust of Chinese brands by customers in the US market, and prevailing anti-China sentiments in the US public discourse, especially during the pandemic years. And also the cultural difference in general, and lack of understanding of professional brand building practices in the US, because they're quite different in approaches between China and in the US. And also potential conflicts between US market needs and the headquarters brand and marketing guidance. That's also a big challenge for a lot of them. We also asked companies whether they feel that engaging in social issues is beneficial to earn trust with stakeholders and build brand in the US. Well, the majority of them answered yes for these questions. So in our survey, companies think the top social issues that they should take actions on and to best earn trust with stakeholders and build the company's brand in the US is climate change. And with more than half of them surveyed companies selecting this as their primary issues. And also, the rest are listed here, like company-wide rescaling and other issues. And clearly that CSR, corporate social responsibility, remains to be a major task for most of our companies. So The U.S. is, needless to say, an important piece of most companies' strategy for globalization, with arguably the largest consumer market in some industries, and access to matured financing, global talents, service, intellectual properties, and supplies of some commodities and goods. So, as the U.S. and China businesses still hold deep commercial relations, interests in each other's market, CGCC remains committed not only to carrying out more constructive engagement and encouraging positive conversations, but also to build bridges and achieving greater synergies to encourage better understanding and cooperation between the world's two largest economies. Okay, so thank you all for listening, and we found that over the long run, companies are still heavily invested in brand building and earning trust in the U.S. Okay, thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. And now I want to welcome Ann Murato, partner, Sustainability Services, Ernst & Young, who will act as the moderator for the Clean Energy and Climate Change panel.
All right, great to be with you guys today, and it seems like a timely topic to talk about climate change and clean energy, given that that was one of the largest areas of interest in working on various topics that your company selected in that survey. So good segue, thank you. I'm Ann Munaretto. I'm a partner in EY's Climate Change and Sustainability Services practice. So I have about a decade of experience, a little bit more than that, in supporting clients on how do we tackle climate change, where should we focus, what should we do about it, what is the right pace, rate of change, how does climate risk impact us, what are our opportunities. I also focus a lot on ESG issues with clients, so supporting clients from a sustainability perspective broadly. And I work a lot in the manufacturing and mobility space, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure to join you guys and today on this topic and with my esteemed peers. And I'm also based in Chicago and love all this Chicago-centric discussion on the topic as well. We'll do intros, maybe over to Suwan.
Hi everyone, very nice to meet you. My name is Suwan, currently serving as Director of ESG at SAI. SAI is a recently Nasdaq-listed company, and we are using renewable energy to power our Bitcoin mining and supercomputing activities. And we also recollect the heat generated by the chips, use this for central heating, greenhouse farming, etc. Besides my industry practice, I'm also serving as a researcher at the University of Cambridge and pursuing my PhD in finance over there. My main research topics is about crypto and the climate change, especially to identify the climate impact of the crypto mining, etc. And also, I'm very curious about SDGs and have been working with UN for a long while. We co-founded a non-for-profit organization in the US, registered at Delaware. It's called Organization of Clean Energy and Climate, which we are trying to raise funds to support the research who are battling with the climate change crisis.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Raj Bajaj, and I'm the Vice President of Sustainability Solutions at Constellation. Our group essentially works with our customers of all sizes, trying to figure out how best to help them achieve their sustainability goals. A lot of it is today related to getting to net zero within a time period of, let's say, 2025 to 2050. So how do you do that in a disciplined manner using technologies available today, technologies that are going to be coming into existence over the next 10 years, and slow glide that particular company so that they can make it in the timelines and at a reasonable cost at the same time. A little bit of background about Constellation. It's a company that we like to call an old new company. We've been around for a long time, More recently, in February of this year, we actually spun off from Exelon, which is a Chicago-based company listed on the NASDAQ. And our new company, Constellation, is the #1 retail player when it comes to serving commodity customers, C&I customers. We serve about 2 million customers in the US on the C&I and residential side. And then in terms of energy, we are the largest provider of clean energy in the US. We have the largest nuclear fleet. We also do a lot of hydro and solar as well. So in terms of putting together a package that appeals to our customer with our energy background as well as our generation, we feel that we provide a very unique value proposition to companies in general.
Good afternoon. Great to be here. I'm James Schulte. First, I just wanted to thank CGCC Chicago and World Business Chicago for putting on this great event and including a panel discussion with Ann and Suwan and Raj here for such an important topic for Chicago, for the Midwest, for the U.S., and for China. So excited to be here. I'm a partner at Sunfox Capital. Sunfox is a growth equity fund investing in companies accelerating and or benefiting from the energy transition. The energy transition is for some of you who are not familiar with it, it's kind of the new term about the way all of our economies are changing towards renewable energy and cleaner sources without some of the focus on climate, if you will, in part because a lot of the change is happening because of economics, even divorced from the climate aspect. And I would be remiss in not saying that part of the reason that those economics have gotten so favorable for wind, for solar, for batteries is because of Chinese leadership in this space and Chinese expertise in manufacturing and really changing that cost picture for these new, cleaner, more sustainable, more digital sources of the way we use energy. So we're investing in companies in that space. We've invested in a transmission technology company with a global reach called Smart Wires that really helps integrate more renewables onto the grid, into Proterra, the leading US manufacturer of electric buses. Electric buses, another space of Chicago and China and Midwestern collaboration and interest. Obviously, Chinese manufacturers play a large role in the electric bus space as well. And then most recently into GridX, a software as a service company helping utilities and consumers and businesses make better, more accurate clean energy decisions by understanding how their usage will change and how that's ultimately affecting their bill. So we're looking at all of the sectors that we'll be discussing today, and I'm a proud Chicagoan as well, so echo what Ann said. It's great to have this event here.
All right, so I think we've assembled a great panel for you guys on this discussion. We've got James, who's investing in these technologies, Raj, who is providing clean energy solutions to various customers, and then also Suwan, who's using clean energy to really solve one of the big challenges from a crypto perspective in her own organization. So before diving too much into the questions, just want to provide a little bit of kind of backdrop for those of you that don't live and eat and breathe in this space like the 3 or the 4 of us do. So I recently returned from COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and it was fantastic to see some renewed collaboration on climate policy between the US and China take place there. So once again, great to have these 2 world leaders making progress, thinking about how they're going to take a leading position on climate change and on climate policy, and really how they're going to support industry within their own nations and really across the world to help go ahead and achieve that. Climate change is a big problem, and actually those 2 nations, the US and China, produce about 50% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, at least as of some of our more recent estimates, including in the last couple of years. So 2 nations with some of the greatest challenges related to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but also with some of the best tools in their toolboxes to go ahead and reduce those emissions. At this point, from a climate change perspective globally, we're at about 1.1 or 1.2 degrees of warming already under our belts. And really the goals established at COP26 in Glasgow were focused on trying to keep global climate change and global warming to 1.5 degrees C. That's getting harder and harder to do, but with some of the announcements that came out from China and from the U.S., there's still hope. There's still a lot of optimism, and I think a big piece is our governments are relying on our corporations, our companies, to go ahead and be part of that solution. So that's why I'm excited we get to talk to various players within the business community today about really what they're doing from a clean energy and climate change perspective. So let's go ahead and get started with our first question. Raj, turning to you here, can you tell us a little bit about the clean energy technologies that customers are coming to you for right now? And maybe any recent project highlights as well would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start off by saying that in general, when you talk about strategies, it's a very wide world when it comes to sustainability. And strategies are not a cookie cutter type model where you can take a Henry Ford type assembly line and say you start here and you'll end up over here. Each company has its own business plans, its own strategies, M&A, geographies, so on and so forth. And so what they do is going to really vary quite a bit. And so when we start conversations with customers, we don't really like to talk about anything very specific. It's more about understanding the customer. And then we like to think of sustainability and strategy in terms of a bar stool with 3 legs. And the first one is analytics. And the analytics is really talking and thinking about what is your baseline for carbon today. Where do you want to end up over what period of time? How many facilities do you have and where are they? If you have 20 facilities and 10 facilities in the US and another 10 across the world, what is the usage of energy, right? Are you looking at one facility where on a dollar per square foot basis the cost is very high? Well, that's your low-hanging fruit. You implement an energy efficiency strategy. It's the easiest way to reduce carbon and save money at the same time. So those are the kind of things you start with. Energy efficiency always is the first thing that we recommend. And then along with that, with more advanced analytics that are becoming available, you can start thinking about scenario analysis. How do I look at a sequence of things I can do across my 20 facilities over what period of time so that things are moving in parallel and there is a strategy versus just throwing darts at a dartboard and hoping that at some point all 20 facilities will come together and get you to zero carbon. The last thing I'll say is, renewables are obviously a big part of any sustainability strategy. RECs and emission-free energy credits or effects that come from the nuclear units are 2 easy ways to get the process started. They're offsets. But then more recently, behind-the-meter projects. And then there's been a virtual PPA that has been in existence for a few years. A lot of complexity with it. These are wholesale transactions, very complicated, results in a lot of volatility in your energy prices. So the market has come up with some new versions of these products where you're converting these wholesale transactions into retail type products. So it's an easier agreement. It's more aligned with what a company is purchasing today. And then it gives you the opportunity to get energy from a new development that's coming on board, which essentially means that you get additionality benefits, which is very important for customers from a claims standpoint when you're thinking about sustainability and a sustainability strategy. I would be remiss not to acknowledge the fact that we're in Chicago, and Constellation in August actually did one of these types of deals with the city of Chicago. The mayor, as a visionary, had a strategy of trying to get the city of Chicago to be one of the first cities in the country to go to zero carbon. And with her vision and her team, they've been able to put together a very robust plan that will get them there. So I want to congratulate the city of Chicago for a very significant milestone and really forcing other large cities around the country to do something about sustainability and impact climate change.
Fantastic. So it sounds like a heavy focus on energy efficiency, and then how do we kind of use renewables after we've reduced energy as much as possible to go ahead and switch to cleaner forms of energy. A variety of different transaction types that various companies are going about and using, and companies as well as, governments as well. So that's fantastic.
And one other thing I forgot to mention here, and that's the risk part of it, because in everything we do in energy, there's a risk associated with it, and mitigating risk is equally important. With the war going on in Europe, more recently in the US, we had a LNG plant that had an explosion. There are macro and micro changes that also can have a very significant impact on anyone's sustainability plan. So always keep in mind that risk part of it.
As weather events as well, as we've seen
Absolutely.
in Texas and the Midwest.
Fantastic, great. All right, and maybe Suwan, can you tell us a little bit about the clean energy technologies that you guys are using currently at SciTech?
So as we said, that we would like to use renewable energy to power our facilities. And currently the approach is that you sign the PPA with the power stations directly, and then you can get the clean energy. But as a listed company, we are also trying to look at some projects who have some kind of potential to develop their own renewable energy power stations. And one of a very interesting project that we're currently looking at is called, I think maybe Raj will be familiar with that, it's called small modular reactor for nuclear power station. It is like the power station that's lower than 300 megawatts, but it can be as low as to a few megawatts. And why we would like to look at the nuclear is that compared to solar, wind, or hydro, the capital investment is not that high. For example, you want to build the same capacity of, like, say, 100 megawatt power stations for the land, at least. It will be much less than you are building a solar power stations or hydro or wind. And also, just like what James just mentioned about the weather things, hydro, solar, and wind, they highly relied on the weather, and then you need to spend a lot of money on the energy storage and how to adjust this for loading the electricity to the grid. So we think, and also because I currently working also doing a research at University of Cambridge, based in UK, and the war actually caused a huge issue about the electricity price in UK and in Europe. And we are thinking maybe nuclear would be a very good solution on that one. And for small modular, those kind of reactor, it's more like a plug and play. You can just match what's the electricity amount there, and then you can do this. But the only kind of problem about that is that it's a long-term process. It's similar to develop a new drug. That investment is high, and then you have to match to do a lot of tests, get a lot of certificate improvement to final stage to deploy this. But I think it will be a very good solution, especially for a company like us. We are in an energy-intensive industry. But if we can make sure that all the electricity we get is renewable, then you can lower the carbon emissions of a company like us a lot.
Fantastic, yeah, that's exciting. Yep.
Yeah, actually, I was going to talk a little bit about SMRs as well later, but one of the things that SMRs do, and UK, to its credit, has taken a very active role in this technology, and we are partnered with Rolls-Royce in the UK. And what is very clear is long-term, UK is going to be a country that understands that as they weed off of gas, coal is really not an option. If you want reliability in your energy strategy, nuclear has to be a part of it, and SMRs are the way to drive it. And we're going to start seeing this technology in the US over the next 5 to 10 years as well.
Yeah, UK and France actually did a very good job at the nuclear part. And I just find that actually US is start to approaching to start to promote the nuclear technology as well. That's why we are here in the US, and we are trying to find some possible projects to do here.
A little bit less real estate in the UK maybe than in the US or China, for example. You can't, not these huge areas of Texas covered in wind or solar farms. But yeah, that's fantastic. It's exciting, and yeah, one of my clients is an aerospace client, and for them, a huge part of that energy transition is moving over to sustainable aviation fuel. And so how do you produce it sustainably? Maybe an SMR. James?
And just to jump in there, because again, where we're at, one of the leading U.S. companies in sustainable aviation fuels is LanzaJet, based here in Chicago and scaling up, and just got a large grant from Breakthrough Energy from Bill Gates' initiative to build a facility, sadly not in the Midwest, in Georgia, but to produce more sustainable aviation fuel. Another homegrown company in the space, United, deeply committed to that deep decarbonization of aviation with bio-based fuels as well.
James, let's stick with you. So as you are evaluating companies to invest in, what are you thinking about in terms of, the specific climate challenges that the technology addresses, viability, what are those factors that you're considering as you're thinking about investing in a specific technology or a specific go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a growth equity fund, our niche in the market is really those companies and technologies that are proven. So unlike SMR, which I take my current investor hat off and put my personal hat on, I think it's fantastic. I think it's going to be critical. As an investor, though, we don't take technology risk. There's other investors out there like Breakthrough Energy, like Energy Impact Partners, that will invest in companies where they're still sorting out the technology. So we're looking for proven technologies that have commercial traction in the market as our way of kind of playing what I would call this kind of current deployment wave. Undersecretary of Energy Jigar Shah, and a Midwest man himself from Illinois, Jigar Shah likes to talk about how so much of this right now is about deployment and getting as much of the currently proven technologies as we can into the market. Energy efficiency, electric vehicles, solar, wind, storage, really to make a big push and a big dent in the current emissions profile. And so that's kind of our sweet spot. But now obviously there's still a lot of risk, there's still a lot of uncertainty because these markets are still changing all the time. So we try to go really deep into the customer need and the customer demand and that buying behavior to sort out what will or won't work. And again, another one for us is, again, my personal hat, I'm a climate warrior. I bleed green, if you will. But as an investor,
nice
I try
tie,
to. Yeah,
example.
Thank you. I did choose the bright green tie purposefully. As an investor, I try to look at it really dispassionately, and there's a bunch of impact investors out there in ESG, and that's fantastic. For us and for our investors, for our LPs, we're trying to really look at what's going to economically work and be able to get to that commercial truth of how much of it is kind of greenwashing and how much of it is truly valuable technologies that that make that economic sense for customers. So a good example of that is increasingly electric vehicles in the fleet space. Those vehicles have come down in price as batteries have come down in price, as the actual vehicles themselves are rolling off the line to serve the fleet's needs. And so that's one where the economics are working in light of the policy environment as well, right? We look at the policy environment and what that means from a compliance and regulation standpoint, as well as an incentive standpoint, as we're assessing where that's going. So fleet EVs are a good example where it's tipping from a kind of, let's do a shiny green project, let's have that EV out on the roads, to actually this saves us money over the life of the usage of the vehicle. It runs longer, so it's a business imperative now to invest in those vehicles.
Yeah, fantastic. And both the U.S. and China, some of the largest manufacturers of autos in the world. Maybe just kind of teasing out one thing that you said, like you really focus on the customer challenges. We've got a lot of companies sitting in the audience today. So what are some of those trends that you're seeing? Like you're seeing a lot of companies focus, or a lot of appetite in the market for EVs you mentioned. That sounds like it's growing. Is there an additional technology that's maybe right up there with it?
Yeah, so certainly EVs is a big one. Battery storage is another, as lithium-ion cells and that manufacturing scale and capacity have ramped up and those costs have come down. And as innovations are making them lighter and more dense, Chicago-based Nanograph just announced a big manufacturing facility here on silicon anode materials so that batteries can be lighter and more energy dense, which is going to be critical as we're looking to apply them in longer distance applications and or where there's weight considerations involved. You can't have 1,000 tons of battery on certainly an airplane and other things. So batteries is a big one. EVs is another. And then I would say, like from a customer pain point perspective, a lot of the themes that we're seeing are around risk and uncertainty and how to make those changes. And so there's kind of a lot of frictions there because companies, understandably, these are new technologies, these are new options, and so how do they navigate the risk? It's, Raj talking about it as well. Suwan deals with the risk in powering your operations, right? You need the power to deliver what you need. And so a lot of the companies that are adding value that we're looking at are those that have a solution and a business model that takes that risk and that uncertainty out of it. So whether it's kind of a subscription or it's a bundled solution, or they're making it seamless and easy for you, so you don't have to figure it out yourself, right? How can it be plug and play, to Suwan's point on SMR? So a lot of those kinds of companies, and that's often digitally enabled, that's often software, but it's also smart hardware, right? Smart hardware still is a big piece of making it simple. You want to, when you plug in your EV, if the car and the charger have the intelligence to work with the grid in real time and optimize how you're charging it, then you don't have to worry about it, right? So it's those kinds of innovations that are helping customers adopt these economically valuable and environmentally valuable technologies.
Yeah, fantastic. Sounds like it's moving through the teenage years almost and hitting that maturity stride. So that's great. Suwan, maybe next question over to you. You talked a little bit about, in your space, crypto being very energy and therefore greenhouse gas intensive based on where you're getting those energy sources from. Can you tell us a little bit about your decarbonization pathway? How do you kind of, within SciTech, start to move and go more carbon neutral over time?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I would like to bring a research that I'm done at Cambridge. It's already published. So we are tackling the Bitcoin mining impact, especially the climate impact. So we built our own electricity consumption index of the whole Bitcoin network, and also we did an estimate about the greenhouse gas emissions of Bitcoin mining. And when we released the Bitcoin electricity consumption index, we got a lot of criticizing from the industry people saying, "Nah, your data is wrong, and how could we consume so many electricity?" Because if we compare the Bitcoin network electricity consumption with the whole nation kind of electricity consumption, Bitcoin network ranked 34th worldwide. And the electricity consumption of Bitcoin network is more than Switzerland, Poland, a lot of countries. But after we did the greenhouse gas emissions, we actually found that the greenhouse gas emissions of whole Bitcoin network ranked 89th worldwide. So compared to electricity consumption, you can find actually Bitcoin mining did use a lot of clean energy. Maybe it's cleaner than a lot of people think. And working in academia, I heard from a lot of researchers to criticizing that Bitcoin mining or crypto mining is a dirty business and it should be abandoned. But the issue here is that the market is too big to be removed because you don't like it. So what's the solution here is that you make the dirty business clean. And I did the carbon accounting for my own company for year 2020. And I found over 90% of the carbon emissions from a crypto mining company is from the electricity consumption. Before China banned the Bitcoin mining earlier last year, before in China, it doesn't like it work in Europe or in US that you can sign PPA with the local power company and then you can get the renewable energy. In China, is that you have to put all of your electricity generated to the grid. So it's a mixed one that you have no choice to choose the clean energy. And what's the approach that we're currently doing now is that we want to make sure that all the electricity consumed is 100% from renewable energy, which can make sure the carbon emission is quite much lower than you're using fossil fuels. And also, another electricity consumption comes from Bitcoin mining is that for cooling. As you are using your computer to do some coding things, you get super hot, and you have to use the fan to cooling it down. Especially for Bitcoin mining, the chips are running 24/7. The heat, the temperature of the chips may be over 80% Celsius degrees, and you have to cooling it down. Most of the company, they're using the fan. So you can, if you go to any mining facilities, you can hear the huge noise because they're using the fan to cooling that. But we developed patented technology that using the cooling system. We use the power, you use the water to cool the chips and then reuse the heat generated by the chips. For example, we calculated what's the heat demand of the whole hotel, And then we can calculate it based on our own technology, how many mining chips they need to power the whole hotel. Then we can do this kind of customized service for hotel, hospital, or like even greenhouse farming, especially for Chicago. We actually had a first demo site at Ohio, because we know that during wintertime here it's gonna be super cold. And for all the greenhouse, and they're doing either agricultural farming or like flower planting, they need the heat. And for our heat, it's 100% clean because it's waste heat. So by our approach, we can lower the carbon emissions in the crypto mining industry and also the heating industry. So it's like a win-win situation. Also, because we sell the heat to the greenhouse farming or like all of the customers, we can get like slightly profit by saying that. So company like us would prefer to pay a premium to use renewable energy. So that's how we are doing now at SAI. And as what I mentioned about the SMR is that we are also looking at some project that we can develop our own power stations. Therefore, we can make sure that everything is clean and then lower the emissions in our company. And we hope that other companies in the industry can learn from us. And then as long as we act together, then we can break the stereotype and let people know that it's not that dirty as people think.
Fantastic. Yep. And I've been working in sustainability for a while, and it does take those leaders to go ahead and pave the way and show people what they didn't think could be done can be done, and then you get people following you, and then you get real change over time. So yes, thank you for the work that you're doing there. So reflecting back a little bit, I started off with some intro on policy. The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA in the United States, is trying to put us on track to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by about 40% in line with the Paris Agreement by the end of the decade. From a Chinese perspective, despite continued growth, they're hoping to peak emissions by 2030 and then get on track for carbon neutrality by 2060. So it was great to hear kind of both of your perspectives, and James, appreciate that you're like, we are investing from an investment perspective. Our niche is focused on those technologies that are already there. And I think there's a lot of focus that we see it come across from a global policy perspective and what companies are focused on, and on technologies that do exist, that really are at price point parity. And by focusing on these technologies, that's going to help us make significant progress during this critical decade of the 2020s. So can you tell us a little bit about what those technologies are, and how you go ahead and try to deploy them and get them to scale so that we can go ahead and achieve these reductions that we need to?
To me, I wasn't sure if you were Raj. So yeah, so the IRA, Illinois also passed landmark climate legislation last year, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. A lot of jurisdictions across the U.S., California certainly continues to be a leader in the U.S. on this, but a lot of policy push here that's exciting and needed. And I like to think about it as a flywheel where the technology starts getting more viable and doing what businesses and consumers are looking for it to do. It gets cheaper, and that allows policy to happen because it's less costly, it's less challenging, it's less complex to pass policy, and then that keeps the flywheel spinning. So I think that's what we've seen with the IRA, certainly. You look at the incentives and the way they're approaching the incentives in large-scale renewables. That's certainly helpful. But the emphasis is kind of shifting towards storage. So there's a lot in battery storage. There's a lot in electric vehicles with tax credits and in investing in electric vehicles, depending on the size of the vehicle and the kind of the climate impact of that. And that's certainly how Illinois has been approaching it as well here. And then, with the economic development lens of this also, and this is where there's a lot of collaboration potential here ultimately, but, I think cities, states, countries are looking for the job story as well. And so a lot of U.S. and local focus on how we can grow and build manufacturing and create jobs here. And so there's a big domestic push for that in the IRA. But still, I think we've already seen some positive signs of where that is leading to still more global collaboration. You look at some of the leading Chinese solar manufacturers investing here in the U.S. and building facilities here, partnering with local governments and communities and unions to produce those here, but that's with Chinese technology and know-how. So I think sometimes that the IRA can get lumped in this kind of competitiveness dynamic, but at the same time, not unlike some Chinese policies we've seen in the last decade or two, that's led to kind of the other party investing locally, and that's, I think, a positive aspect of it as well. I guess finally, too, that I would mention, there's a big focus on the grid, and the grid, how utilities and how the federal government can make it more efficient to invest in grid technologies, to incorporate all these renewables, all these electric vehicles. That's certainly been a big focus here in Illinois. The work that ComEd and Ameren are doing to make sure that the lights are on when we need them on, and even as the energy coming onto the grid and the way we consume it is changing and becoming more variable. And that's a big topic going forward in the policy space, because I just saw a statistic today that the US has only built 3.5 gigawatts of interregional transmission capacity, which basically means allowing electrons produced farther away travel across the country to be consumed elsewhere. So you think about a wind farm in North Dakota, well, interregional transmission would allow that electron produced there to be consumed in New York City, for instance. The US has built 3.5 gigawatts of interregional transmission. China has built 260 gigawatts of interregional transmission. So the Chinese are leaps and bounds ahead when it comes to a really national grid that enables large-scale renewables where they can be built efficiently and effectively and have the most output, but then consumed where the population is. And I know this is something Constellation looks at a lot, and the different wholesale markets and how transmission and generation impact that and the clean energy mix in local places. But because of the way our grid is set up, it makes it harder to have it be truly national. So that's something that hopefully the IRA will also help make progress on.
Yep, we all probably have those visuals of a space map of the United States, for example, and all the lights are on that East Coast corridor, where arguably there's the least space available to go ahead. And we always hear about these large wind farms in Texas and solar fields across Nebraska. And so, that the grid modernization does seem like it's going to be pretty crucial in order for us to move. I know from my clients' perspectives, there's do we invest in a VPPA where the energy is cheap and plentiful and try to really up the renewables no matter where they are in the United States, or do I try to locate where I'm going ahead and moving from a renewable energy perspective closer to where I'm using it? Raj, anything you want to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is an enormous bill, right? I mean, when you start talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, it's $369 billion over 10 years in incentives and spend. And it covers a very wide gamut of ways in which this could be done. Estimates that we've looked at Constellation range from 24 to 42% reduction in carbon if this was to become successful. So this is a game changer for our country. And again, it shows that there's going to be a gear shift, per se, in terms of where we are to where we're going to go over the next 10 years. And I tried to dig up a few examples to show you the breadth of what's going on with this Inflation Reduction Act. So one is on the energy efficiency side. So a lot of cities, including Chicago, are talking about what to do with commercial real estate and how to really force the issue in terms of driving down carbon for them. Huge issue, a lot of very old buildings in these larger cities. And there are a lot of incentives in place or part of the IRA that will help make this happen and happen at a faster pace. And it would be aligned with the cities and what they're trying to do. So I think that's very exciting. The second is a production tax credit for nuclear plants that can be up to $15 a megawatt hour. What does that mean? We were just talking about nuclear and the fact that if you want to really truly have a comprehensive energy policy, you need to have nuclear units in the US that continue to operate, that are operating today, and to make sure that they're competitive. Now, Illinois gets that. Illinois passed a law to ensure that the nuclear units in the state stay open because of resiliency, reliability, and the fact that who knows when the sun is going to shine and the wind is going to blow. And as Europe is seeing, when you don't have nuclear and things go wrong, they can really go wrong, and Germany is experiencing that today. So that's another part of the IRA. The third one is tax incentives for clean energy technology, including advanced reactors. So there's a drive to really force technology in this country and to make sure that we are at par with everyone else around the world, and we're making sure that if there's any technology overseas, that we can take advantage of it over here to drive sustainability. And the fourth one I wanted to talk about is solar panels, because very near and dear to me. And we in this country, finally, industry is waking up to the fact that they need to accelerate sustainability and zero carbon goals. I have many customers that used to have 2040 goals, now they're 2025. Great, wonderful for our country. The problem is that we don't have the developers developing the projects to be able to accomplish what we know is coming. And a lot of that is driven by the lack of products and parts, and solar panels is one of it. So we need more solar panels. We need China, who is a big producer of panels, to be bringing more panels here to the US. We need US manufacturing, meaning China setting up companies here in the US to be able to manufacture, and companies like First Solar, US company, expanding, which they've already announced, making more solar panels. Because there are a lot of issues that you were talking about, James. There are other issues from a production demand standpoint, and if the whole picture doesn't come together, we will not be able to accomplish what we're trying to do. So it's a very complex formula, and the IRA is really trying to drive all of that and make it happen together versus individually.
Thanks so much to you both. I know a lot of my clients, maybe some of you guys in the audience, are thinking the same thing. Wouldn't it be nice if the government just took care of this if we just had a grid that was modernized and resilient across the United States, and if I could source 50% renewable energy just by going through my local utility, I think that that's in the future. It's just right now we need those companies that are leaders, that are going ahead and setting those goals and making specific contracts to go ahead and decarbonize. So yeah, I think from my client perspective, you guys hit on a lot of those pieces, which is they're focused on how do we go ahead and source more renewable energy, reduce from an energy efficiency perspective, and there's a lot of focus on fleets, for example. How can I move over to e-mobility from a fleet perspective? Okay. So that's a little bit of those technologies that are right now looking really good. Invest now, go ahead and move on them now, because the price point parity is there. We just have to work on kind of some of the supply pieces that Raj brought up. If we look out, so I feel like a lot of clients, if you have a science-based target, for example, you're looking at about a 40% reduction in emissions by 2030 over a, let's say, 2020 baseline. Those are broad numbers. Don't quote me on that. But then you're probably looking forward towards net zero. And so what are those technologies? Like, let's say that we use those existing technologies at scale to get us to 2030 to help us get to that big milestone for 2030. But what are those technologies that are going to help us really push to net zero in the balancing decades, in the 2030s and the 2040s? Maybe do we want to start with Raj? We'll go back to you.
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the biggest or the most available element in the world is hydrogen. And we have a lot of water on Earth. So what really makes sense is how can we utilize hydrogen as a resource and a part of a sustainability strategy. A lot of conversation around it, a lot of discussion. It's also part of the IRA where the government is talking about setting up hydrogen hubs to accelerate change. But at the end of the day, doing this is, I learned this in 8th grade chemistry or physics, where you use electrolysis to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then you take the hydrogen and you do something with it. And what we are trying to do at Constellation is use our nuclear fleet to take carbon-free energy to produce hydrogen. And once you get that hydrogen, when it's produced, you have the ability now to take that hydrogen and use it for fuel. You were talking about the fact that, for aircrafts, this is technology that's developing. A company here in the Chicago area is very much focused on it, and this is going to be a potential fuel for the future. And that's looking more of a reality versus fiction from a few years ago. You can also take this hydrogen, you can produce it during off-peak times when the pricing is very low, and then you can store it just like you store battery storage and use the hydrogen during on-peak hours for producing electricity or doing other things. So there's a benefit of hydrogen in terms of the variety of things that you can do with it. So hydrogen is one area where there's going to be a lot of activity with these hubs created. It's going to accelerate over the next 5 years. The other thing I wanted to talk about was carbon capture. And this is also exciting technology, and it's important because the IEA is projecting that we really need to produce about 1 billion tons per year of carbon dioxide reduction in 2050. That has to come from carbon capture. So this is a technology that needs to not only develop but accelerate, and again, the IRA, and there's a tax credit associated with this. So again, showing you all the different pieces to what the IRA is going to do. But here, if you're generating electricity through gas, you can potentially take that carbon, you can condense that carbon or get it to a state where you can transfer and move that carbon to a location where it can be transported and stored underground. Now this could be an oil and gas reservoir, but some way of putting it underground so that now that carbon is not with us, it's not part of our environment. You now can monetize that the offsets of that carbon, and now you're producing electricity where the carbon is being taken care of as part of the generation process. So this is very exciting. It gives you a way to really create very valid, auditable offsets, which the market is looking for, and there's a very active market for it, while you're doing something with the carbon that is extremely efficient. And it allows for you to do gas generation. We have a lot of gas in this country. Take advantage of the fact that it's low cost, it's part of our grid and part of our grid mix, but eliminating the carbon, which is the bad guy in that process. So another way technology can really help us in being stronger as a country moving forward.
And I'll just jump in on the carbon capture too with a feel-good local story, I'll say, and gives me a lot of hope for this. So I'm not investing in carbon capture now. It's a little too early, but I deeply care about it. And so part of what I do in my free time is I'm a mentor to energy transition startups, one of which is Sandbox Carbon, which has invented a really efficient, easy way to capture ambient carbon dioxide from the exhaust from buildings, effectively take it, turn it into minerals, and then that's easy to move and store. It doesn't require extra energy. So much of the carbon capture we're seeing today is very energy intensive. So much of the offset market doesn't have the additionality, is not really clear on, are you actually removing the carbon from the atmosphere? And that's where, again, despite I'm not investing in it, what I'm excited about is the ability to invest in the future because of the building blocks that we in Chicago, Illinois, the Midwest are putting together to enable that kind of innovation with national labs like Argonne and local universities, right, with the intellectual capital, the human capital to get these companies launched, and then with local strategies to help support these. World Business Chicago is very focused on advanced manufacturing, which is in support of they helped launch this local accelerator called M-Hub, which is helping these hard tech companies get to market, and that's where Sandbox Carbon is growing and learning. And so the policy is a big piece of what's going to help Sandbox Carbon earn revenue in the market and get those customers to demand it and get that market flywheel going. And we have to have the other pieces too of the human capital, the intellectual capital, the support to grow from an idea to a full business, and those new technologies that will do that last bit of decarbonization in industrial and or pull emissions out of the atmosphere.
Anything you want to add, Swan?
I just want to add a little bit about the carbon credits and then carbon capture. There's actually a non-for-profit organization in Chicago funded by a bunch of professors at the University of Chicago called Climate Vault. they're just like getting the donations from the companies and they use the money to invest in the carbon capture startups. And talking about carbon credits market trading, it's more like a financial incentives for all the company while you are trying to lower your carbon emissions. Talking about the US and China actually just started its carbon markets last year. It's like a national one that you can sell and or buy carbon credits from the market. The carbon credits price in China is much lower than EU ETS and US, but I think that's a good signal to show that there is a financial incentives for all the companies to do something about lower your emissions. It can, good for your revenue, for your profits, and also it's good for the environment. That's why I totally agree with about what James and Reg said about combining the economic output and environmental output together, then thereby you have more like kind of reasons to make the changes.
Yep, fantastic. No, great point. And kind of going back to the policy too, at EY we do a Renewable Energy Country Attractiveness Index, RECI for short, analysis every year or so, looking at how are countries really attracting renewable energy production and investment, and the US and China are constantly on the top of that list. So it's fantastic to kind of see that. And James, thanks so much for kind of introducing some of those factors that you see as kind of helping to build the solutions and scale the solutions, as you were talking through kind of what we're doing in Chicago and Illinois and the Midwest, because these technologies are exciting. Sometimes they're, the question is can we have that right now? Can we just start using that right now? And the answer is no, not necessarily. It's not at scale. It's not green enough right now. There's challenges with how we use it, but these questions of kind of how we get to scale, I think are really key there. So, okay. I guess, Raj, anything else in terms of like how we scale hydrogen? I think hydrogen is really one of those technologies as we think about the various areas to decarbonize. Let's say by 2030 we get to that decarbonized grid, or mostly decarbonized grid, and it's modern and it's within the United States it's maybe mirroring a little bit closer to China in terms of its grid strength. And then we're able to shift over from an EV perspective and really start to move off of internal combustion engines and over to EV. It does seem like then we're taking a look at some of those harder to abate sectors, whether it's transportation like rail or shipping or aviation or we're not going to touch as much on the agricultural point of view today, but anything you want to say on scaling hydrogen?
I mean, the only thing I'll say is it's interesting to me when we talk about hydrogen for a technology that's still in the process of going through its evolution, the amount of interest that we're seeing from industry. I mean, a lot of the heavy industry that is struggling to reduce its carbon. Illinois has a lot of those types of companies in the state, are tremendously interested in how fast we can get a hydrogen hub here in the Midwest, and they can get started on using hydrogen as a core part of their overall strategy. Because they're so carbon intensive industries, the need to do something very dramatic and the sense of urgency is very high. So I have a feeling that this is going to develop, personally I feel, even faster than what's being projected, because the demand is there and the technology is accelerating very quickly. And the government is supporting it as well.
Yeah, I like it. And as a transportation hub, it seems like a key piece. So I do have more questions for this panel, who has been fantastic, but we did want to pause and just allow anyone in the audience to go ahead and stand up, and we can make sure we get a microphone to you. If you guys do have any questions for the panelists here. Yep, I see one hand.
Thank you very much. Looking for the hydrogen, aspect, but just renewable is always great to do, but devil is always in the details. So just looking for panels response, right? I'm from Minnesota. We don't have a lot of solar powers. We're a little too cold. But if you think about wind energy, if you think about nuclear energy, everybody love it. It sounds great. People want to build it. They do combined cycles, simple cycles, but they don't, how should I say, not in my backyard, right? So politic-wise, it's kind of hard to build those. So going forward, what do you see, as traditional energy sources? How do you think those renewable energy, which ones has the chance of going forward? Besides electrical, I understand that hydrogen is a big going forward.
It's a great question, and we have customers that have facilities all around the country, and some of them could be in Minnesota, for example. So how do you help them address some of these needs? Now, some companies, for example, know behind-the-meter solar, for example, is not a great option in Minnesota. It's not a great option in Michigan, where I live, either. But for the reasons of at least starting the process, they're looking more at those types of projects. What we're also doing as a supplier, and our competitors are doing the same, is we're trying to develop other products similar in structure to what I was talking about earlier, like these off-site renewable products, where we know ERCOT, Texas has the lowest price overall in the country for electricity. So we are developing like a solar or a wind over there, and we're taking the RECs off of that location and providing it to a facility in Minnesota. So there are ways to try to offset and monetize and show that you are diligently trying to reduce your carbon, although you physically are not able to do it very effectively today. Now, with technologies that are evolving, like hydrogen and a hub. The hub is for the Midwest. There could be ways for us to potentially get that hydrogen to other states around Illinois, if Illinois does get a hub. The SMRs are also another avenue where, if you can get less than 300 megawatts, and they're even micro SMRs, which are less than 10 megawatts. So those types of technologies could also be beneficial. But it's a really good question, and I don't have a great answer for you.
The other thing I'd add, a couple factors there. One is solar is continuing to drop in cost. So even if there's less sun than in California or Arizona, you're going to be reaching price points at some point where it's still economical to have solar, even if the output is less. So that's one positive. The other is, and this is more, kind of technology to come, but it's a critical need for the system, is long duration storage, which would allow Minnesota to store up cheap wind energy generated in January and February, overnight when the grid doesn't need it, and then consume it in July and August. But the long duration storage is still a technology that's not quite there. And then there's the final one, which we've talked about a couple times now. They like to call the grid the largest battery. So where and how can the grid enable cost-effective renewables to get to demand in Minnesota and colder climates, and vice versa, right? Then in the dead of winter, Minnesota can export its wind to states that need it as well. So a better, more tied in, more digital grid will enable more of that to be consumed economically. So those are the others that I see helping with power sector decarbonization in different geographies like Minnesota.
Yeah, so not in my backyard, sometimes friendly called NIMBY, definitely a big issue, and really kind of cuts across any part of a company's organization and value chain. Well, do I put in my new plant here? Well, tell me about the emissions associated with that, and tell me about your environmental permit. I don't know if we want you here, right? But maybe we go in and we're bringing jobs, and we're bringing and we're mitigating our environmental footprint, and so it's really kind of that stakeholder engagement process early. It's kind of talking about the benefits, and then also kind of how do we go ahead and have a win-win situation for those residents that will be affected. So we got just about a couple minutes left, so we could probably do one more question from the room. Yes, right here.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrew Murawski. The question is about solar panels. Elon Musk computed very easily that energy for the whole US can be easily generated by creating a solar panel of the size of 10 miles per 10 miles, and the battery size 1 mile by 1 mile. My question is, since this is a very simple solution for the whole country. Why this is not considered by whomever supposed to be thinking about this, and yet we have China which can help us out in order to produce those solar panels. So everything is in hand, there's no action. My question is why? Thank you.
I think one of the very obvious reasons that solar is not that reliable, as you cannot 100% rely on solar like technology or power station as of now. And also when James and Raj talking about the battery storage, everything like that, it's not happening yet. It's still under development, and that it wouldn't be a solution as of now, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I think there's a lot of advocates in the industry that would like it to be just solar and wind and batteries, and that would be all that we need. A lot of the analysis I've seen is that while that could work, it's actually not the most economical and the most practical, and that's where kind of there's a mix of energy sources. There's all the local considerations to play. And so, we don't live in a world where we can kind of wave that magic wand. Certainly those are big pieces of it, right? Where and how can homeowners in the US and China adopt more batteries and solar themselves so that they can, make electricity on their roofs and then use it as they need it? Where are businesses and cities that can do that as well? But as we're evolving, there may be times where it's more efficient or reliable or cost effective, right? Illinois is a great example of that. There's plenty of people who wanted all solar, all wind, all storage, but the reality is that the nuclear fleet owned by Constellation is a very cost-effective, powerful, no pun intended, asset that's generating electricity incredibly reliable 24/7, 365 at an attractive price point, right? So there's things with kind of the current setup that maybe you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater in the interest of moving forward. And instead of then taking the energy that you're spending fighting for pure solar, pure storage, you apply those incentives, you apply the engagement to get folks to adopt electric vehicles and other sources and other technologies that are critical to this as well. So that's my take, is kind of it's all of the above strategy on the power side, and then push towards those next areas that matter. Because if we have solar and storage, but we're still driving gas-powered vehicles, the climate is still going to warm to 3 degrees. So we've got to go through each of those sectors and not get too hung up on, I think, a perfect solution in any one.
But I definitely appreciate the question and the desire to, can we just do this right now? Can we just decarbonize right now? So I absolutely agree with that sentiment. So thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you, James and Raj and Suwan. Thank you all for your great engagement. Hopefully you have some good takeaways.
Thank you, Ann, for moderating a good discussion. The staff's going to take a couple minutes to reset the stage, so give us a few moments before we're back to it.